Hello and welcome to the podcast, Eye of the Beholder. I am your host, Dulce Crystal Ortiz, and in today's episode, we are going to launch into a past life story. We're going to start off with my own personal experience with past lives. The one that will be shared in this episode will be told sort of in a third person narrative. Because even though there is a grand debate between past lives and if they really are true, if they exist, that's, to each their own, whether they believe in it or not. So I wholeheartedly do believe that the experience that I was able to have when it came to past lives, I did notice a tremendous difference and change. Not only in my emotions, but also in my healing journey, physically, emotionally, mentally. Even though I believe my soul did experience it, and it is sort of like a memory, it was still another lifetime, another storyline, different from the one that I'm experiencing, of course, now. Welcome. In this podcast, we delve into hypnotherapy, specifically past lives, regression. I've noticed that in my work, I have been able to have a lot of experiences with my clients and guiding them into past lives. And they were able to share with me afterwards a lot of changes that they were able to notice, where they were able to heal a lot of things that they may have not been able to do doing other kinds of therapy. There is a little bit of a trigger warning in regards to, passing away. Some violence, depictions of violence as well. I'm not going to be as detailed when it comes to explaining that experience or those situations, but it's just something to take note of before we begin the story. Because even though it could be considered a violent timeline, it could be considered a violent experience. When it comes to healing, at the start, when I first went back into that lifetime, I, of course, felt a lot of negative emotions and a lot of questions of, why me, and why did this have to happen, and why did it have to happen during a time when I had... In that timeline, I was a woman in that timeline, by the way. She was taken away from the people that she loved most. And that caused not only a lot of grief for myself, but also for the grief of the loss of those that were left behind. Let's go ahead and get into the story. So the interesting thing about this lifetime that I'm going to share is that it's probably... to this day, it's still one of the base timelines that had created such an amalgamation of negative emotions, of deep-seated anger and hatred and resentment, and even to some extent a lot of guilt, a lot of lack of self-confidence as well. Is that when I came into this lifetime, I didn't really understand why I grew up having such deep emotions. Whenever I happened to go, to a tarot reader, or what they would call a clairvoyant or a psychic, I was told many times before, I started my healing journey on my own, that I was a, very sensitive child. And I mean, to this day, I'm still pretty sensitive, of course. That's never going to go away. It's just part of the gift of this lifetime that I'm able to carry. So I was told many times that I was, very sensitive and hyper aware and hyper attuned to my surroundings and the people around me and energies around me and emotions and all this and that. And I did for a long time of my life before healing I did feel negative towards myself. And to some extent, I did even hate that part of myself because it's, I felt like it was a block. I felt like it was something that caused me to stay stuck in a way to where I wasn't moving forward. And, it causes a lot of anger and frustration and a lot of, well, why can't I do things that I want to do? I was, in that lifetime, a woman, and it was interesting because I want to say I knew things, I know details of that lifetime, but it's kind of in snippets. It wasn't like full on, but I do remember the first time that I dropped into that lifetime, I was actually at the scene of where I was, my life was taken from me. And I experienced, those last moments of that lifetime with seeing through her eyes what she saw. And I could feel within my body, my physical body, the emotions that she was carrying. And this lifetime, I was able to sort of make a connection of what it was that was blocking me, the blocks that I had, and how it was affecting me in this lifetime. So I did notice that when I dropped into that lifetime, I was able to see those last moments of when again, my life was being taken from me, my last few breaths, and I saw who it was that, committed that act. And it was a violent crime. So it, stirred up a lot of angry emotions. And I also, had a few connections that again, I made within my mind when it was kind of like an aha moment, like the light bulb going off in your head, like, oh, that's where it comes from. I remember I had a lot of negative emotions when it came to the opposite gender, when it came to men, and I didn't understand why, honestly. I mean, this lifetime, I have had some experiences with men that haven't been the best. And, I mean, there is some trauma in some places in this lifetime. But looking at it, I felt like it wasn't really so intense for me to feel what I was feeling, if that makes any sense. I feel like the emotions that I was feeling in this lifetime in regards to men was very, very much a lot of hatred and anger and resentment towards them. Like, it was such a deep-seated anger that it was like a poison that was just coursing through my body. And it was affecting me because it's, like that saying goes, you take the poison hoping to, hurt the other person. But at the end of the day, you're the one that's taking it. You're taking the poison. It doesn't work that way. You're the one that's going to feel the repercussions of it. And I was carrying all of those emotions. I didn't understand why. And also another note is that there is this idea that whenever something traumatic happens to the human body in a lifetime, there's a possibility that you may carry a birthmark or some kind of indication of that, past physical trauma in your present lifetime. And I do actually believe in that as well, because I have a very large and noteworthy birthmark that, I always kind of wondered what it was, because I'm thinking this wasn't a normal birthmark. Nobody in my family has this kind of birthmark. She was experiencing her last moments, and I could feel that anger and that resentment of why it was to the opposite gender, because it was a man that had caused her demise in that lifetime. So the thing is, in that lifetime, she had experienced such a tremendous negative, violent attack from a man. And it was a man that had become sort of obsessed with her in that lifetime. And mind you, that lifetime where she was harmed, it wasn't like recent times. It was probably, I want to say, maybe in 1800s, somewhere around there. But again, that's just a feeling, because I get some details when I go into those lifetimes, but not everything. So there's some information. I'm guessing that the reason why some information comes through is to sort of just give me an idea of like the time, the place, things like that. In that lifetime, it wasn't just her that got hurt. That act of violence was geared towards her, but it also ended up taking her family and her loved ones, hurting them in the process as well. And, you know, there was a lot of negative emotions, a lot of hurt and pain and sadness and anger, and just, you know, why me? A lot of questioning of why. And I kind of like went into a very small negative state of depression. And it's like, the thing is, when you're peeling back layers, and you're peeling back a lot of the feelings that you don't normally look at, or you're afraid to look at, or to bring attention to, those are the parts of yourself that are the most important. And they're the ones that need to be seen and to feel, so that they can be pushed through. Another thing I noticed also as well after that was that my physical steps, because this change that happens, it happens on a cellular level, and it takes days, it takes moments for everything to sort of realign in a way. And I noticed that my body physically was changing, like my steps were different. I noticed that when I took a step, I was more sure of myself. And I hadn't even realized it, because, again, I had lived this lifetime in such a way that it seemed normal what I was living. But no, it was an unhealed version of myself. And I noticed that when I was able to take a step, I was more firm. I was more balanced. I was more here and present. The main thing that I witnessed that like just broke me into tears when I was going through that lifetime was that right after I came out, I made a statement where I said, I'm human. Like, I'm here. And I remember when I said that, like, I just started breaking down crying, because I hadn't realized that I was just drifting and sort of just going through the motions of being alive, but I wasn't really here. I wasn't really present. I was stuck in a past that I hadn't even realized that I was stuck in, but my soul knew, but this physical body didn't know. So going into now 2023, years have passed. I've practiced a lot more with, going into past lives, not only others, but myself. And now I've noticed that it's easier I've always been very sensitive when it comes to my dreams as well. It's a gift that has been passed down through the generations from what I've been told. And it just comes naturally. Like, I'm able to become very aware of future events before they happen. And I mean, it's not to say that I know the future, but it's just some details, some things I just know, like in my gut, I know the truth. It's connected to intuition and to source. So the more healing you do, you become much more available to the messages that come through source, through universe, and things like that. And a lot of my messages come through because of my dreams. I just remember waking up and remembering sort of like a movie in a way of that same lifetime that I had been able to jump into through a session that I was doing with a practitioner back in 2021. I remember seeing it as if it were a movie. So it went a little bit something like this. In that lifetime, she was a woman that was in her, I would say, mid-20s. I believe somewhere between 1700s to 1800s. She would have been considered old for her age, for to not have been married yet, or have had children or family. But she was a woman that was very much more on the idea of wanting to create a life for herself, even though it wasn't customary for that lifetime or for society. But she came from a good family. It was a family that, her parents thought she was odd, but they allowed her to live her life as she saw fit. They didn't force her or want to push her into having or doing something with her life that she didn't want to do, even though other family members did do that. So again, she came from a family where she had siblings, she had her parents. She of course lived with them because in that time, a woman wasn't on her own, especially if she was unmarried. She was comfortable and she lived a good life, and she explored all the things that she liked. She liked learning and reading and learning more about herself and her gifts, you could say, was considered, very beautiful for that time. She had a dowry of what you would call. She came from a good family, so everybody wondered why she hadn't married yet when she could have picked anyone she wanted. And she had had many suitors too in that lifetime. But she just chose to focus on herself. And her family, her parents, they thought that that was all right. They didn't understand, but they didn't fight her on, forcing her to be something she wasn't. So she lived her life, but she did notice one thing, that wherever she went, she always drew attention. Everyone loved being around her. She had such a great energy. So wherever she went, she always got the attention of, the people in town. Everybody would want to stop and talk to her and say hi and, just speak with her if they could for some time, because they noticed that when they spoke with her, she had these weird and strange ideas, and I guess you could say her topics weren't the norm. But the people loved it. And even though they might have said whispers behind her back, they enjoyed her company. At some point, there was this family that lived in that town as well, but they weren't there all year round. They were a family that came to town once in a while, and they had a son. And their son, it was their eldest son. And this family is what you could call close to royalty in a way in that lifetime. No one ever said no to him. Anything he asked for, he didn't even have to ask. He could just take because it was his. He just figured the world was his. And he grew up with that mentality and an ego that far reached beyond anyone else's. He thought that he was, law. He thought that he was king, and to some extent, he believed that he was even, God, because no one could even go against him. And it was all because of, his family that he came from. So he did all that he wanted whenever he wanted, and there were never any repercussions for him. And again, a young boy that grows up with that environment ends up growing into being a very dangerous man. So, as luck would have it, when he came into town that year, that's when he met her. Well, technically he saw her, but he was able to know and understand what many people were talking about when they told him, his people that wanted to suck up to their family, would always tell him the best family, the best daughters of the best families are here. And he never wanted to marry. He saw himself as a bachelor because he wanted to fool around and just mess around with women of high society. And that's what he did. He didn't talk to her immediately. He just sort of observed her from afar, because even though he was boisterous, he didn't have a lot of confidence within himself. But, he used his ego to try to mask that self-doubt. So he knew that he had to bide his time with her, and first he wanted to observe her from afar. And she was unaware. She knew of the family, she knew of the son, but she knew that it didn't really matter to her, so she didn't give it much thought. Again, she was focusing on herself and her world. And she didn't notice that one of the darkest people that would change her life was watching from afar. She knew from the start that that was not the kind of person that she wanted to be near. So she tried to be polite, as society would deem necessary, and she tried to stay away from him. But, of course, because he was a man that never had been rejected, and he was a man that always got whatever he wanted, he didn't stop his pursuit. He tried to grab her attention any way he could. I mean, he used his money, he used his influence, he tried to always be near her, and over time, that became an obsession for him. And he thought because she hadn't chosen anyone else, and she had rejected him, that it was just because she was not yet ready to get married. So he used that as an excuse to sort of stay on the horizon of always watching her, allowing her to do as she wanted. But of course, the day that she would need to marry or have a family, he was going to be the one that she would choose. I mean, he was sure of himself, right? And the thing is, that's not what it was. It's just that she never found anyone that she really truly wanted to be with or build a family with. That is, until one day there was another family that came to that town. It was a family that had sort of the same status and wealth that her family had. So they also had a son. And that son was, I believe, her age, or if not, maybe slightly younger. And when they met, it was like their souls knew. They knew each other. They had been actually together in other past lives as well, but, it's kind of like what that saying goes of the whole, love at first sight thing. Except it wasn't really love, it was more of like recognition at first sight. It's like their souls knew each other, and they wanted to meet again. They wanted to be close to each other again. So when they met, it's like they couldn't stay away from one another. She knew. Over time, it was friendship. And, over the span of a few months, time had passed, and that friendship turned into a love that they had for one another. So over time, they spent more and more time with one another. And they both knew, they wanted to be together. They wanted to move past what was friendship. They wanted to have their friendship, but also go into a romantic relationship. So they were, in talks of their family, or in talks of them being able to be paired off and married. And this information, of course, got around the village, as everything always did at that time, very easily. That information got to the family, what we considered the royal family, right? The first son found out, and he had already grown an obsession. So knowing that he was not the chosen one, knowing that she was choosing someone else, what he had wasn't love for her. What he had was obsession, and what he wanted to have was ownership. So when he knew of that news, he had thought that it was wrong, and that the townspeople didn't know what they were talking about, because he was supposed to be the one to be chosen. He, of course, found her, and he had sort of in a way reprimanded her and argued and, tried to force her in a way to leave that relationship that she was going into, that marriage she was going into, and to choose him. And she made it clear that she didn't want him. She didn't want what he had to offer, that she wanted something else, and the only one that she could have that with was with the other man. He couldn't understand that. He left in a rage, fueled by his obsession and his ego and his desire to have everything that he believes belongs to him. he went and he created and concocted a plan, pretty much. What he did was, one night, fueled by his obsession, he found her home, and it was the middle of the night. It was very dark. He pretty much lit her home on fire. He dragged her out. She had family members still inside the home, but he went inside and he dragged her out, and he placed her on the soft, dewy grass, and in his obsession, he told her that he could save her from all this pain and all this hurt, and he could keep her safe if she chose him. And even though she knew that she was losing her family and she was possibly going to lose her life, she still stood her ground, and she said no, that she refused. She refused him and everything that he had to offer, and she chose her best friend. And in that moment, because he was so angry that he couldn't have what he wanted, because he knew that he couldn't have her, that's when he made the action of, well, keeping her away from the people that she loved most, keeping her away from her fiancé. And he plunged a knife into her navel, into her stomach, and he slit her abdomen, because he was so angry and so bent on causing pain. He sort of placed what we would call like a curse on her soul. And because she was in such a state of despair and anger and hurt and resentment towards him, this curse took hold for some lifetimes. He didn't ever want her to be whole. He wanted her for her to be disconnected from her top half to her lower half. And even though physically he only made, half of her abdomen was cut, energetically, this curse did take hold. And she passed away looking into the eyes of the person that she had hated the most and she was the most angry with. Now we make it all the way to this lifetime. Even though that story might have sounded a little bit tragic, it was still beautiful. Something that helped me to realize a lot about myself and a lot about my psyche, which I never understood. Like, I always had these certain ideas in my head about what I wanted for myself, and I never understood where it came from. The details were able to come fully together. And that lifetime, that story, helped me to see that, to be able to experience that. And it's a beautiful thing. And it may have had a little bit of tragedy in it, but it also had a lot of love in it. It had a lot of goodness in it. I was able to see how in that lifetime, she was able to find a very good love with someone who she considered her best friend. She was able to have a family that loved her. And even though society had deemed who she was and what she was doing to be out of the norm, they were, sticking with her. They were by her side. And they allowed her to be who she wanted to be. And yes, that lifetime, it was marred by unfortunate events, but it depends on how you look at it, right? At the end of the day, an experience is an experience. Whether it is positive or negative, it depends on your viewpoint. And I can understand how the viewpoint can be dark and it can be challenging to accept events when you are in an unhealed state. But the more that you heal, the more that you're able to clear and open up those blocked paths, you will see that it's easier to forgive, it's easier to love, it's easier to be present, it's easier to be able to fill your own cup to where you're able to help others around you as well. Each session, it's never the same. And the emotions that come up or drum up from any of these events, it always happens because there's something important that the soul, your soul, needs to remember about it, you know? And again, it doesn't have to be something as intense as that. That was just something that I feel was the main reason as to why I was living in a lot of blocked negative energy in this lifetime. And I didn't understand why. And it took time. It came in parts. And I mean, who knows? There is a possibility that there might be more information coming from that timeline later on. The thing is, your soul will only reveal the information that is necessary at that moment. So some information is shared, let's say at some point, and then years can pass, months, weeks, who knows, however long. And if your soul is ready, it may gather some more information and share it with you. And I think that's the beauty of life. It's like, it's a never-ending cycle. It's an eternity, infinity. Again, there's never a whole, it's never black and white when it comes to this kind of topic. Well, I believe if these kinds of stories interest you, this podcast is up every Tuesday. And if you would like to help out the channel, then feel free to subscribe, comment anything that you feel, or share any of experiences that you feel that would be interesting also. If you want maybe for me to just, know about, or if you have any questions in regard to it, to regression therapy, or like any kind of holistic practices, because all of them are interconnected in some way. So it's pretty fascinating to be able to see like what other people have been able to experience. Also, if you notice, I am wearing the black t-shirt version of the Flower of Life Sacred Geometry, and that's available in the link down below. It's on my Etsy storefront, and these are pretty interesting symbols because they allow, whenever you focus in on them, it allows your mind to actually open up, and it helps your consciousness to sort of remember like what it is that its purpose is, in a way. How, the flower life, it's actually associated with just how everything is interconnected with one another. And I mean, they look like little flowers, but in reality, they're just circles, like infinity circles, just going over and over again, all on top of each other. And then, they create the symbol. And it's like the circle of life. It is a unisex classic t-shirt, so, it's meant for both men and women. And I just modified it a little bit. I, made it sort of off the shoulder, and I cut it into a crop shirt. But depending on your style, I feel like it's something that would be kind of universal for everybody, because if you like the t-shirt style, you can have it that way, and if you wish to modify it, it's very easy to modify. I do have a Patreon, which I will have linked down below, and the fun thing about the Patreon is that we do a group hypnotherapy session. So whether you do a group hypnotherapy session or one-on-one, you do reap the benefits of it. Of course, when it's one-on-one, it's more tailored to specifically you and, what it is that you're going through and what you wish to change or to make better or to release negative programs. But doing the group session, of course, I've always had excellent feedback where it may not be as tailored to one's own journey, but it is something that does help out to help ground yourself and to sort of come back to who you are in the present. So with that, I do thank you for joining me on this journey, and I do hope to see you on the next episode. Have a great week.